And we are live. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Reedsy Live, our ongoing series of webinars where we bring on people from the world of publishing to show you how to write and publish better books. Today is a very special one on storytelling, on the writing part of that equation, and I'm glad that you could all join me today. My name is Martin. I'm a member of the team here at Reedsy. I'm based in London, though we're super international. In case you're brand new to Reedsy, we're an online platform that connects authors with the best editors, book designers, marketers in the world. So if you're looking for people you can trust to help you bring your book to life, whether that means getting it traditionally published or self-publishing it, we're the place. Have a look at our link in here and sign up for a free account and try out all the stuff we have. As I mentioned, today we are having on our guest Jessica Brody, who's the author of Save the Cat Writes a Novel. Some of you may be familiar with Save the Cat as a screenwriting principle, school, way of life. We've got a post on it on the Reedsy blog that some of you may have seen. But yeah, we're very pleased to have her on, and I'm glad that you could join me today. So, while we're waiting, why don't you let me know where you're coming from, and where are you today? It's always good to see a good chunk of international and domestic viewers. Let me see. We've got Helen from Connecticut, Paddy from the Ozarks, Yumna from Pakistan. Well, thank you for joining. I know it's very late over there. Lenny or Lena from Somerset in the UK, Craig from Summerland, British Columbia, Stephen from Denver. Fantastic. We have someone from South Burlington, someone from Minnesota, Zelia. We have Deborah from Avila Beach, California. A lot of Californians, a lot of Brits, some Americans. Glad to see you all joining us. And yeah, we'll kick this thing off in just a few minutes. I'm just noticing on my little thing here that I thought for a second I was not going to be able to see some of your comments for a little bit later when we have our Q&A, but all is well. Darren says, Kia ora from New Zealand. Thank you for joining us. I know it's early for you as well. Miguel from Puerto Rico. Denver from the great state of Michigan. The thing I learned recently is Michiganders refer to where they live in Michigan by saying where it's located on the mitt. It looks like a mitten, I guess. We have Tendai from Silver Spring, Maryland. Welcome. Seems like a lot of good folks here. I really appreciate you joining. I know it's not always the most convenient time for everyone, but I'm glad to see such a thriving community at these webinars. So a little bit of housekeeping before we set things off. There will be some people joining late who will be asking questions in the comments. If you could help me field some of them, that would be amazing. One of the things people always ask is, will there be a replay? And the answer is yes. This is being live streamed on YouTube. You can come back here at any point from now until the end of YouTube, and you should be able to find this video there. Also in the descriptions, there's a link to the Reedsy Live website. In the days following this, we'll get a transcript done and put it up there. So if you prefer to read through it, there will also be that option. Now, I am noticing that it is a minute past the hour, which means it's time for us to get a move on with this. So please, let me introduce my guest, who is the author of 20 novels, including Amelia Gray's Almost Okay, I Speak Boy, and the System Divine trilogy. As a writing educator, she is the founder of Writing Mastery Academy and the author of the #1 best-selling guide, Save the Cat Writes a Novel. Please welcome Jessica Brody. Jessica, how you doing?
Hello, thank you so much for having me, and welcome everyone. I'm so excited to see all of these people from all over. This is great.
We're very pleased to have you. I'm here in London, as I said. Where do we find you today?
I'm near Portland, Oregon. Unfortunately, we don't have a cool thing to show our mitt, but I'm near Portland.
Yeah, I don't know what shape is it like shaped like a sirloin steak?
It's a square. It's a really boring square.
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining us. I hope the weather is better there than it is over here. Before we get a crack on, is there anything people should know, or is it all covered in the presentation?
Well, it's all covered in the presentation, and just so you know, I'm welcome to stay a little bit late to answer more questions. I tend to go right up to the hour, but I'm happy to answer questions for as long as you'd like to stay on, Martin.
Cool. Yeah, I'm happy. I've had dinner already, so it's all good. Cool. We'll give people another minute or so just to filter in. before we start, I know it's a bit preemptive, but if you could humor us and give this video a like and perhaps subscribe to our channel. Every week we have got brand new content, and you'll be the first to know whenever we have webinars like this one coming up. Yeah, but you know what? I'm a little bit impatient. Give this thing a like. We'll get this thing started regardless of whether you like us or not. But yeah, I will appreciate it. All right. So yeah, you sent over a PowerPoint, Jessica. Should we move on?
Let's go. Yeah.
Cool. I'll be behind the scenes. If you need anything, just let me know. Otherwise, I'll see you on the other side.
Okay. Thank you. All right, everyone. Welcome to this special presentation on an introduction to the Save the Cat method for novelists. Let's dive in. We have a lot to cover today. Today, what I'm going to talk about is I'm going to teach you how the Save the Cat method can help you outline, write, draft, revise, and fix your novel, any genre of novel. So we have a lot to cover today, which is why at the end, I'm going to give you a link to download my free Save the Cat Starter Kit. It comes with a recap of all of the things we're going to talk about today, plus some extra bonus content to help you get started with the method. If you are not familiar with the Save the Cat method, this is a great crash course to get you up and running. You'll be able to use everything you learned today right away. If you're already familiar with the method, great. This is also a great refresher to kind of give you a look at the method through some new eyes. I might say something, describe something in a new way that you haven't heard before, so it's also great for people already familiar with it. Before I get started, I just want to give you a quick overview of how I got into the seat today and why I'm talking to you today. So I want to flash back to about a little over 15 years ago. This was me. Well, not really. It's a stock photo, but it kind of looks like me, so I chose it. This was me trying and failing to get my first manuscript represented by an agent. So I wanted to go that traditional publishing route, get the agent, sell the novel to a major publisher, and I kept getting rejected over and over again. But the strange thing was there was a theme throughout my rejection letters. There was a common thread, and they all seemed to say a similar thing, which is, you're a good writer, but you don't know how to tell a story, or there's no story here. And this really confused me. How can you be a good writer without knowing how to tell a story? I thought the two things went together. They really don't. And what I learned very quickly is that I didn't know what a story was. I didn't know how to structure one. I didn't know what it entailed. And that became clear when I was introduced to this book called Save the Cat. It was a screenwriting guide, originally written by Blake Snyder, a screenwriter, and it broke down screenplays into these 15 beats, or like a blueprint that you could follow. But what I found when I read this book was that these 15 beats didn't just apply to screenplays. They applied to stories in general. And I thought, what if I took these 15 beats and applied it to the novel that I was trying to get published? Well, that became my first experiment with the Save the Cat method. I ended up rewriting my entire novel using this method that Blake Snyder laid out for screenwriters. I rewrote the novel. I ended up getting an agent for that rewrite. The agent sold it to a major publisher, St. Martin's Press, and I ended up selling over 20 novels to major publishers over the next 15 years using this very method. And I sold these to publishers like Simon & Schuster, Penguin Random House, Macmillan. So I'd like to think that the method works. But then I had this question of, does it just work for me? Do I just kind of happen to write the kinds of books that sort of feel like movies? So I set out to experiment again with the method. Does this method apply to all novels, to all stories? And my research led me to write a book called Save the Cat Writes a Novel, in which I take the original screenwriting method and I apply it to novels. And I actually have a young adult version of the book coming out in July of this year, so that's very exciting. So here's what I found when I was researching this book, Save the Cat Writes a Novel. I read a ton of different novels. I read novels from mystery novels like The Girl on the Train, modern mysteries like The Girl on the Train. I read horror like Stephen King's Misery. I read young adult romance like Everything Everything, middle grade fantasy like Percy Jackson, and even classics like The Grapes of Wrath and earlier. And I found that hidden inside all of these books, there was this sort of code. And here's what I found. I found that about 10% of the way through all of these stories, there was this big life-changing event, something that kind of stopped the main character in their tracks and forced them to think about life differently. I found that around 20% of the way through all of these stories, that same main character, that hero, decided to try something new or go somewhere new. I found that around 50% of the way through all of these stories, there was a major turning point that completely changed the direction of the plot. And I found that around 75% of the way through all these stories, there was a rock bottom moment. And around 80 to 85% of the way through all of these stories, there was another moment of discovery where the hero found a resolution. Now, that's either a really strange coincidence or I stumbled upon something interesting, which I call the secret storytelling code. It's this pattern that exists within all stories. Blake Snyder found it in screenplays. I found it in novels. Blake Snyder just gave these beats different names. He called them things like the catalyst, the break into two, the midpoint, the all is lost, the break into three. And these points, these are 5 of the 15 beats or plot points that we're going to talk about today. They can be found in all great stories, screenplays and novels alike. So what exactly is the Save the Cat method? Well, as you can see, it's a structure blueprint. It's a series of plot points that can be found in every great story ever told. But I like to think of it a little differently. I like to think of it as a transformation machine, which means an imperfect hero goes into this thing that we're going to call the beat sheet or the outline of the novel, and a less imperfect hero comes out. It's essentially a method that helps you track a compelling character arc across an entire story. The Save the Cat beat sheet is basically at the heart of the method, and it is a 3-act structure that has been broken down even further into these 15 beats or plot points that we're going to talk about today. So these are things that are going to make your story more compelling, help with the pacing, hold your reader's attention, and leave your reader feeling satisfied. Okay, that sounds pretty good? It is. Let's get into it. Although before we do, you might be thinking, okay, but is this just for outlining a novel? Like, is this just when people start writing and you want to plot out what happens? Although the Save the Cat method is really great for outlining or fleshing out a new idea, it's actually also good for a lot of other things, like maybe test driving a new idea. Before you start writing, you might ask yourself, how many beats can I instantly come up with, or just come up with rough ideas for, even if they change later on? If you can come up with ideas for beats right away, you know that the story can go the distance. It's also great for figuring out what's broken in a story. It's an excellent diagnostic tool for looking at a story you're already working on and realizing where you've gone astray, or maybe where your story could be more impactful. It's also an excellent tool for revising an existing story. Maybe you have a first draft that you drafted really quickly, or it was a discovery draft, and now you have a bunch of scenes and a bunch of things that you need to figure out how to make it work. If you compare what you have to this Save the Cat beat sheet, you can easily see what needs to be revised, what needs to be moved around, what can be cut, and what needs to be added. It's also a really good tool for getting back on track after you've wandered, 300 miles off the course of your current story, which I've definitely done, and I know a lot of writers have too. Okay, but why is it called Save the Cat? If you signed up for this webinar thinking it was about saving cats, like rescuing them, you might be disappointed. It's not really what it's about, although that is a very worthy cause and you should rescue cats. But this is a little different. So Save the Cat simply refers to the moment in a story when a hero does something redeeming. Or you could think of it as the moment when the audience or the reader gets behind the hero of your story. So Blake Snyder called it the Save the Cat moment because it's the moment where the hero saves a cat, like from a burning tree or a burning house or a tree or a shelter. But it's not you don't literally have to save a cat. It's just a metaphor for something that the hero does that is redeeming. One of my favorite examples of a Save the Cat moment is from the movie Aladdin. Aladdin is seen at the beginning stealing a loaf of bread. He's chased through the marketplace. He wreaks all sorts of havoc. And then what does he do? He gives the bread to a starving mother and child. And suddenly we are on Aladdin's side. He has been redeemed, and we are following him through the whole story. So that's what where Save the Cat comes from. All right, so here's how we're going to go through the Save the Cat method today. First, I'm going to give you a quick introduction of all 15 beats. So we're going to go pretty quickly because there's a lot to cover. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use a beat sheet or an example of a popular novel to show you each of those 15 beats. And then afterwards, we're going to put it all together with a whole nother example, and you're going to see the beat sheet in action from start to finish. So the book that we're going to cover first is called The Girl on the Train. If you haven't read it, I'm sorry, there will be spoilers in this presentation, but I figured this book's been out long enough, you can be spoiled. All right. So we're in our first beat. Before we get started, I just want to give you a quick tour of the beat slides. You're going to see the name of the beat up on the top. You're going to see our entire novel roadmap, the entire 15 beats right underneath there. So you can always see where we are along the entire process. And then on the left side, you'll see a black box that says single scene. It's either going to say single scene or multi-scene, which means the beat takes place in one scene or one chapter, or it spans multiple scenes or multiple chapters, as you'll see when we get into some of the multi-scene beats. You'll also see a percentage mark there that is roughly where the beat should come within your novel. Now, these are rough guidelines. When people get very nervous about these numbers, about sticking to them exactly, I say, don't worry about them. Use them if you need them and let them go if you don't, if they just kind of make you a little bit nuts. But basically, these guidelines are taken from averages of really successful novels. So where do these beats fall within very successful novels? I've averaged those all together to give you these percentages as a guideline. All right, so we're in our first beat, the opening image. This is where we're going to set the tone, style, and mood of the story. It's essentially a before snapshot of who your flawed main character is at the start of the story. And from here on out, we're going to call your main character the hero. So essentially, it's a starting point of their transformation. Remember, this is a transformation machine. So where are they before they go into the machine? And how is their life or their world flawed? Essentially, we want to show who your hero is and what their life is like. And we get one image to really give the reader that first glimpse or that first impression. So if you are doing world building, this is also where we're going to get the first glimpse of your hero's world. Now, it's called the opening image and not the opening monologue or the opening info dump because it works best when it's visual and when we see the hero interacting with their world. That is the best way to engage your reader right off the bat, is to drop them into an active scene and show who this hero is and what their life is like. All right, so when we look at our example, The Girl on the Train, we see in the opening image that Rachel is riding a train, fantasizing about other people's lives. So what does this tell us? Well, it gives us a sense that, one, this is a very regular occurrence for her, and also that she fantasizes about things a lot, that maybe she doesn't actually live in the real world, she prefers to live in her head. And that is a quick glimpse of a flaw that's going to play out throughout the rest of the story. All right, now we get into the setup. As you can see, this is a multi-scene beat. It spans 1 to 10% of your novel, so it is multiple scenes or chapters in which a lot of important things are happening. These are scenes that we're going to use to explore the hero's status quo life, so their life before the transformation begins, and all of its flaws. The flaws are the important part. We want to show how our hero's life is problematic. So what does your hero's life look like before that epic transformation? The opening image gave us our first taste. This is where we get to explore it more. If you're going to include a save the cat moment, this is where you might put it in the setup. And this is also where we're going to introduce other supporting characters in the story. And also, super important, we're going to introduce our hero's primary goal here. This is something external or tangible that the hero is pursuing. We also can call these the wants. Now, it's important for your hero to be pursuing something at the start of the story. Nothing turns off a reader than the heroes is just sitting around waiting for something to happen to them. We want our hero to be actively doing something at the start. Also, giving them something to pursue not only puts them in motion, which is one of the most active ways you can engage a reader, is to have a hero in motion. It also tells us a little bit something about your hero by what it tells us what they want. It doesn't have to be what they want throughout the entire story. Goals will often change, and I'm going to point out places where those goals will often change, but giving your hero a goal from the start is an instant way to engage your reader. This is also a chance to show more of your world if you're doing some world building here. But essentially what the setup boils down to is it's demonstrating why this hero or this world needs to change. We're creating a sense of urgency for our reader. Our reader is going to be asking at the beginning, why are we here? Why do I need to read this story? And we answer that question by showing why this hero is flawed, why they need change in their life. That creates that urgency that the reader will want to keep reading to find out if that change occurs. Also, at the same time, we're hinting at the stakes should the hero not change, which again helps with that urgency of this story. In The Girl on the Train, the setup is basically we learn that Rachel has a drinking problem and often blacks out. So we know now she's an unreliable narrator. She can't get over her ex-husband, Tom, and she's recently lost her job. She rides that train every day looking for glimpses of Jess and Jason, whom she thinks has the perfect marriage. This fantasy couple that she wants to see every day. That's that goal she's pursuing. And her roommate is getting tired of her drinking and might kick her out if it continues. So now we've got some stakes. We see Rachel's life is a mess, and if it doesn't change, she's going to be out on the street. So we feel that urgency in the setup. All right, somewhere with 5% of the way through, we want to have this beat called the theme stated. The theme stated is essentially a statement that is subtly made by usually a secondary character that hints at what the hero's arc or transformation will be. So essentially, what does your hero need to learn or discover or overcome by the end of the story? How are they going to transform along this transformation machine? We like to plant that as a little subtle hint or a little seed in the reader's mind right at the beginning of the story. It's not obvious, it's not over the top, it's subtle, so that when you do deliver on that transformation by the end, the reader subconsciously feels like they've gone on this very exciting journey, that they somehow knew what it was about, but maybe not consciously. So it's usually related, the theme state is usually related to a flaw that the hero has to overcome, or maybe a fear they have to conquer. We can also call the theme stated the life lesson. What does your hero need to learn in order to fix their life throughout this story? In The Girl on the Train, we see this actually coming, I think it's on the first or second page. And Rachel narrates, "My mother used to tell me that I had an overactive imagination. Tom said that too." How do you like that? Rachel needs to learn how to face reality. We already saw her with her overactive imagination, and now we're planting that seed that is going to be the problem that she has to overcome by the end in order to truly fix her life. And actually, not surprisingly, it's the problem she has to overcome to solve the mystery as well. All right. We can't stay in the setup forever. Eventually, we're going to have to move on. And the way we move on is by throwing in a catalyst. Single scene that comes at around 10%, which is an inciting incident or life-changing event that is essentially going to catapult the hero into a new world or a new way of thinking. So it's an action beat that needs to be big enough to break the hero from their status quo life and keep them from returning to that life. If your hero can convincingly go back to the way things were after the catalyst, your catalyst is probably not big enough, because you risk your reader asking, why don't they just go back to their old life? What's really compelling them to change? So we want to make sure that this action beat is big enough. That's why you'll often see at the catalyst common things like breakups, deaths, firings, attacks. Those are things that are very hard to come back from, or very hard to return to normal life after those have happened. You'll also see invitations happen here, like an invitation to appear at or compete in some sort of event or tournament. In The Girl on the Train, the catalyst comes when Rachel blacks out and wakes up with bruises, a bump on her head, and blood in her hair. She's unable to remember what happened the night before, but she thinks she remembers seeing Jess, the fantasy Jess, whose real name is actually Megan, kissing another man and getting angry about it. It's kind of hard to go back to your status quo life after you might have injured someone or harmed someone and you don't remember. So that's a really effective catalyst right there. It's also the start of the mystery. All right, the catalyst bumps us into a multi-scene beat called the debate, roughly 10% of the first of your novel, and it takes us to the end of Act 1. These are multiple scenes or chapters where your hero has a chance to essentially react to the catalyst. Something big just happened. They need time to process it. So really what's happening here is the hero is debating what to do next. And it's usually presented in the form of a question. That doesn't mean there will be a question on the page, or there could be, but if you summed up these scenes, they would sum up into a kind of question, like, should I go? What do I do? Am I ready? What does this mean? Those kinds of things, because the hero is essentially processing what just happened at the catalyst. We also sometimes see this as Preparation section. Maybe the hero knows exactly what to do next after the catalyst, but we want to give them time to prepare, maybe mentally, maybe physically, maybe emotionally. And we do that to help inform the reader that the next thing that they're about to do, this upcoming change, is big. It requires preparation. So the purpose of this beat is to either show how reluctant your hero is to change, or is to make, or perhaps just make that upcoming decision feel believably momentous by having the hero prepare for it. So in The Girl on the Train, the question that sums up the debate scenes are, what happened on Saturday night? And what will Rachel do about it? So in this section where she's debating this, we also learn that Megan Hipwell, the woman that she remembers seeing in her blacked out state, is missing. So that kind of gives us a little bit more information to go on before we go into Act 2. Oh, okay, good. So the break into 2. We are now at the threshold between Act 1 and Act 2. A single scene beat that comes around the 20% mark is going to transition us into the second act. This is a moment when the hero decides to either accept a call to action, leave their comfort zone, try something new, venture into a new world or new way of thinking, or maybe all of the above. But the underlying theme here is new. Break into 2 is bringing us into a new world, a new part of the story. The more you can make your second act feel new, the more your reader will feel like they're going somewhere, like things are happening in this story. So essentially, this is a proactive beat that separates the status quo world of Act 1 from the new upside down world of Act 2. And I call it the upside down world, not because things literally have to be upside down. We don't all have to write Alice in Wonderland, but essentially because we want to remember that this should feel different. It should feel foreign. Your hero should feel like a fish out of water in Act 2, because that's going to give your story momentum. Now, this is often where we'll see a new or modified goal introduced. So maybe the Act 1 goal is going to continue through Act 2, but because that catalyst broke through the status quo world, it's quite believable that status quo goal might change as well. So often at the break into 2, we'll see a new goal introduced, something the hero will pursue throughout at least the first half of Act 2. So in The Girl on the Train, we see the break into 2 is Rachel essentially decides to insert herself into the case. She thinks she has information that the police need. She thinks she's valuable to this missing persons case. So she vows to help solve the mystery of the missing Megan Hipwell, and that becomes her new goal. All right, once we're in Act 2, it's time to introduce a new character. We call this character the B-story character. So it's a single scene beat right after the break into 2, somewhere within the beginning of Act 2, where we introduce a new character who will ultimately help the hero learn their theme or that life lesson. So what does your hero need to do to transform by the end? In some way, this B-story character is going to represent that journey, represent that theme, or help the hero learn it. And so this character essentially represents what we call the B story. In Save the Cat terms, the B story is the internal story of the novel. The external story is all the stuff going on outside of your hero, all of the plot points that you're throwing at your hero. The internal story is how those external plot points are affecting your hero inside, how it's affecting their psyche, how it's making them or forcing them to transform. That is what we call the internal story. So we bring a character in to help represent that internal story, to bring that internal story out of your character's head, out of their psyche, and onto the page. So this character can come in lots of different forms. It can be a love interest, a mentor, a friend, a nemesis, a sidekick, or something else. But the key is that they somehow represent that internal journey that the hero is on by maybe either representing the flaw that the hero has, maybe representing the life lesson that the hero needs to learn. Now, a question I get asked a lot is, can I have more than one B-story character? Absolutely, you can, but you want to make sure that those B-story characters, if you have more than one, that they represent the theme in different ways, or they teach the hero the theme coming from a different angle. Otherwise, you run the question of, why do I need both? And both characters will start to feel redundant. So actually, The Girl on the Train does have two B-story characters. Rachel's theme, remember, is facing reality, getting out of her imagination, and it's represented by two different characters in the novel. The first is Scott Hipwell, the missing Megan's husband. Now, remember, he started out as part of that fantasy couple, and his name was Jason. His real name is Scott Hipwell. Now, he starts out as a love interest, but he turns out to be very different than the Jason that Rachel imagined. He's a much darker person than she envisioned. So that's interesting that we're representing her facing reality by creating a character that is nothing like the character that Rachel imagined. That's how he's representing that theme. On the other hand, we have Anna, who is Rachel's ex-husband's current wife, and she represents Rachel's painful past. So she is the new wife. She represents that past that Rachel is trying to overcome. Two characters representing the theme in different ways. All right, now we're in the heart of Act 2. We call it the fun and games. It is the longest beat of the entire novel. Multiple scenes start spanning 20% to 50% of your novel. This is essentially a sequence of scenes or chapters where the hero navigates their new world. So we ask ourselves, how are they faring? Are they loving it, hating it, succeeding, floundering? We also see them pursuing their Act 2 goal, and we can ask ourselves, are they making strides to achieve it? Or are they struggling to achieve it? This beat can also be called the promise of the premise, because essentially any premise of any story is really just boils down to an Act 1 hero in an Act 2 world. And when we make that Act 2 world different enough, putting an Act 1 hero into it, immediately sparks are going to fly. Immediately we're going to have juxtaposition. Immediately we're going to have conflict. We're going to have fun. And that's where the term fun and games really comes from. And that's what your premise is. So that's why I urge you to make that Act 2 world different enough so that your premise really shines. We can also call this the hook of the novel. Why the reader picked up the novel in the first place. They want to read about an Act 1 hero in an Act 2 world. Now, it's important to note that this beat might just be only fun for the reader. It might not be fun for the hero. It doesn't mean that the hero has to be having fun here, as we're going to see in an example coming up later, where the fun and games is very, very far from fun. But it's fun for the reader because they're seeing that juxtaposition. They're seeing that Act 1 hero in the Act 2 world. So in The Girl on the Train, actually, Rachel has a lot of fun in the fun and games. She's investigating. She's playing detective. She's having a blast. She researches. She creates theories. She meets with Scott. She tips off the police about Megan kissing another man. She's really having a good time here. She even quits drinking and seems to be making strides towards solving the case. She is definitely succeeding in her fun and games. She's actually having fun and seemingly succeeding at her goal. The fun and games culminates at a beat called the midpoint. It is a single scene beat that happens 50% of the way through the story, which is literally the middle of the novel. And the fun and games culminates in either a false victory, meaning the hero has thus far been succeeding and or has achieved their goal, or maybe has come close to achieving their goal, or has achieved some big part of their goal. Or perhaps it's a false defeat, in which the hero has thus far been floundering in the fun and games and or has not achieved their goal, or has maybe lost a big part of their goal. Either way, something needs to happen here at the midpoint that's going to raise the stakes of the story and push the story in a new direction. So some popular choices in order to shift the direction of the plot. We see a lot of plot twists happen here. Definitely shifts the direction of the plot by revealing some kind of surprise. We'll see ticking clocks appear here. If this doesn't happen by this time, X, Y, Z will happen. We see shocking reveals happen here. We see the love story ramp up here. It's sometimes hard to go back to who they were before once that love story ramps up. So something big should happen at the midpoint that's essentially going to shift that direction of the plot. Because what we want here is we want to push the hero out of the fun and games into the next beat and ultimately toward real change. So this midpoint really needs to feel like it's no longer fun and games anymore. Things are starting to get serious. And we see that play out really well in The Girl on the Train. The main suspect, Kamal, is arrested. So we have a false victory. Rachel thinks she solved the case. She got the main suspect arrested, but soon after he's released, which proves that the victory was false. And then, to raise the stakes, turn the story in a new direction, Megan's body is found, upgrading this case to a murder investigation. It's no longer fun and games. Rachel's not just playing detective anymore. Now a woman is dead. That's a great example of stakes being raised at the midpoint. All right, once we've shifted the direction of the plot, we are in a brand new beat and a brand new direction. It is called The Bad Guys Close In. It's a multi-scene beat that spans 25% of the novel. And essentially, you can figure out what direction your bad guys close in is going to take based on your midpoint. If your midpoint was a false victory, then this will be a downward path where things get progressively worse for your hero. Because remember, we want to shift the direction of the plot so that it doesn't feel stagnant. On the other hand, if your midpoint was a false defeat, a false low, then this will feel like an upward path where things get progressively better for your hero. And we're going to see an example of this coming up next. But regardless of path, this is the beat where stakes and tension and conflict are heightened. We really want to feel like the walls are closing in on your hero. It's a claustrophobic beat. It's where things are feeling tighter and tighter. You could also call it the conflict closes in. If you don't have real bad guys, you can throw conflict at your hero. But really, every hero has a kind of bad guys that we call the internal bad guys. These are your hero's flaws, those things that they haven't quite transformed out of yet, those things that they haven't fully conquered. They are putting more and more pressure on your hero to change internally as well. So a lot of things are closing in here in this beat. Now, because the midpoint changed the direction of the plot, we will often see a new or modified goal being introduced at the bad guys close in. The hero is heading in a new direction. There's a chance that they might have a new goal with that new direction. In The Girl on the Train, things get progressively worse for Rachel as she loses herself in the investigation. She starts seeing Megan's therapist, whom she thinks Megan was having an affair with. She sleeps with Megan's husband, Scott, in an attempt to get closer to this imaginary Jason. So she's still kind of pursuing that fantasy life of hers. And she starts to remember things from the night of Megan's disappearance, and she starts to drink again. So then we see those flaws coming back, those internal bad guys closing in. Now, regardless if you're on an upward or a downward path in your fun and games, all paths lead to the all is lost. A single scene beat around 3/4 of the way through your novel, which basically marks the lowest point of the story. This is an action beat where something will happen to the hero that pushes them to rock bottom. So there's often a sense of failure to achieve a goal here, or something is lost that's important to the hero. That's where we get that title, All is Lost. We want to make sure that the hero really has failed in some way here or lost something. And that's also why this beat will often include what's called a whiff of death. So maybe something literally dies here. Maybe a mentor dies here. Maybe a pet dies here. Maybe a family member dies here. Or you can also have a metaphorical death. Maybe a relationship dies here. Maybe an idea or a partnership or a friendship dies here. And the reason we insert the whiff of death is not because we're callous authors who just like to put in death because it works and we're trying to manipulate the reader. No, because actually what death does is it symbolizes the death of the old hero. Something has to die, something has to give so that the new hero, the transformed hero, can be reborn. So we insert something that dies here in order to symbolize that transition out of the old hero and into the new hero, which is coming up soon. So that's what we use the whiff of death for. In The Girl on the Train, at this moment, Scott finds out that Rachel has been lying to him and locks her up, threatening to kill her. So there we see our whiff of death. It seems like she's completely lost her goal here of solving this mystery because she's locked up in this closet. And also she discovers that Megan was pregnant when she died and the baby wasn't Scott's or Kamal's. So her two main suspects are now out of the game, out of the running. She has essentially failed at this point. The all is lost is the low point, but then the hero has a chance to wallow in it. They have a chance to basically react once again to this thing that has happened to them. So this is another reaction beat, multiple scenes, 75 to 80% of your novel, where the hero takes time to process what's happened. If that sounds like the debate, it's very similar. It's similar to what happened after the catalyst. We give our hero time to process. I like to call it the wallowing beat because heroes often wallow here, or they grieve, or they mourn, or maybe they get angry and rant and throw things. But essentially, the hero should be worse off here than anywhere else in the novel because they've tried and they've failed, and now they get a chance to really wallow in that failure. Now, it feels like the darkest hour, but remember, we're not just bringing them low just because it works. We are doing something very symbolic here. This is the darkness before the dawn. This is the gestation period of that new hero who's going to be reborn. This dark night of the soul is necessary for the hero to dig deep down and find the solution that they need to break into Act 3 coming up next. So that's why this beat will often include a dark night epiphany, some sort of final clue or piece of information or new way of looking at things falls into place, or the hero has some sort of life-changing aha realization that's going to lead to their next decision. So in The Girl on the Train, we see Rachel drinking herself into a stupor. So she's back to her old ways, and now she's even worse off than she was before. She tries to tell the police about Scott, but she's turned away. They don't believe her anymore. And then she finally confronts a man from her memories of that night, and he gives her a very key piece of information about what happened. So in her darkness, she goes back into something that's scary. She goes to confront this man, and that's where she finds the peace that she needs. All right. So the dark night of the soul, the dark night epiphany, leads to an aha moment and a solution. The break into 3 is the threshold between Act 2 and Act 3, comes around 80%. It's one scene in which the hero realizes what they need to do. You could also call it a breakthrough moment. So in this realization, they are coming up with some sort of plan to fix all of the problems from Act 2, and maybe more important, to fix themselves. So our character arc is nearly complete now. The character knows what they need to do. They know how to overcome their flaws. They know how to fix the messes they've made. But now we need to see them actually doing it. And that's what the next beat is going to be about. You'll find the break into 3 will often come with a modified goal or a new plan. We call it the Act 3 goal. It's the thing they're going to pursue throughout Act 3. So in The Girl on the Train, by confronting her past and facing that reality, which is her theme, Rachel realizes that Tom has been lying to her and manipulating her for a long time. So what does she do? She gets on a train, and goes to rescue Anna, her B-story character, from Tom, which is her Act 3 goal. So that brings us into the finale. As I said, the break into 3 is the decision to act. Now we get the implementation. And that's what we see throughout this beat called the finale, a multi-scene beat that's going to bring us to the end of the novel, the last 20% of your story, where the hero must prove that they really have learned the theme by enacting their Act 3 plan or goal and proving that they have what it takes. That's why we don't make it easy for them. We throw lots of conflict at them. But this is where we're going to see those bad guys being destroyed, those flaws being conquered, hostages are rescued, lovers are reunited, whatever else you've dreamed up for your big Act 3 finale. Sometimes the help of the B-story character is brought in here if the B-story character, survived after the all is lost whiff of death. And it's important to note that the finale should never feel easy. It should feel like a test. Because it is. We are testing the hero. Do you really have what it takes to conquer this flaw? We know that you know what to do. Can you actually do it? So we throw lots of conflict in. And that's why it's often called the climax of the story. By the end, not only is the hero's world saved, it's usually a better place than it was before. I say usually because not all books have to have a happy ending. You might not choose to have a happy ending, but your story needs to go somewhere. And that's what the finale is really wrapping up that journey. In The Girl on the Train, we see together with Anna, Rachel confronts and brings down Tom for the murder of Megan Hipwell. And when Tom tries to kill Rachel, she symbolically stabs him with a corkscrew, the symbol of her drinking, the flaw, overcoming the flaw, and the past, and all the things. It's all coming together in this beat. Love this book so much. All right, that brings us to our final scene of the novel, 100% single scene beat, where we have, ta-da, an after snapshot of your hero. Remember, the opening image was the before snapshot. Now your hero has gone through the transformation machine. What do they look like when they come out the other end? That's what we snap here in this snapshot. So it is an end point of their transformation, and it shows who the hero is after their exciting journey has changed them. Now, once again, like the opening image, it works best when it's visual, when we are showing the reader something and letting the reader piece together the pieces themselves instead of telling them what you want them to know. And it also helps if you mirror the opening image in some way. Maybe you put the hero in the same location as the opening image, but now they're behaving differently. Maybe they're holding the same object. Maybe they're encountering the same situation, but now differently. When we can mirror the opening image, we can really show the reader just how far the hero has come and give them the pieces that they need to solve that mystery themselves and see exactly how the hero has transformed. And I say mystery, I don't mean it needs to be a literal mystery, but when the reader gets a glimpse of who your hero is from beginning to end, they can solve the entire puzzle. They can put it together. All right, so in The Girl on the Train, we see Rachel on a train. There's our mirror, and she's riding toward her new life. She's now sober, no longer stuck in the past. So we get our mirror to the opening image is the train ride, and now she's not fantasizing about someone else's life. She's going toward her own new life. So that was a quick overview of The Girl on the Train beat sheet. If you want to read the full beat sheet with all of the details and all of the page counts, you can find that in Save the Cat Writes a Novel. That's one of the 10 books that I break down in entirety in the book. All right, let's look at another beat sheet. Let's put all the beats together and see how they work in a completely different type of novel. This is a young adult sci-fi novel called The Hunger Games. You might have heard of it. If you haven't, you're probably going to be spoiled. But here we go. This is going to be very quick, but hopefully it'll help you put all those pieces together. So the beat sheet of The Hunger Games. We have an opening image. Katniss wakes up on District 12 on the morning of the reaping. She is poor, often hungry, and thinks solely of keeping her family alive. That is her goal. Her setup, we see Katniss's world of District 12. It's a tough life. She hunts illegally in the woods to make ends meet. She's very protective of her sister Prim, distrustful of most others, which is her flaw. And although she's angry about the injustices of the Capitol, she feels very powerless to do anything about it. You might note that that's going to change by the end, which it should. It is the setup. It is the status quo. And I should note this book does have a Save the Cat moment. Essentially, Prim brings home, or it's a backstory, but Prim brought home a stray cat. Katniss wanted to kill it because it was another mouth to feed. Prim begged her not to kill it. And what does Katniss do? She saves the cat. Just saying. All right, so the theme stated comes actually a little later in this novel, but Peeta says to Katniss the night before the games, I keep wishing I could think of a way to show the Capitol that they don't own me, that I'm more than just a piece in their games. And as we already know, Katniss feels powerless against the Capitol. But this theme stated is planting the seed that eventually she will do just that. She will show the Capitol that they don't own her. In the end, this is what she needs to do to transform, show the Capitol they don't own her. The catalyst comes, breaks through the status quo world. It's an epic catalyst. Prim's name is called at the reaping for the Hunger Games. Katniss volunteers to take her place. There's no question about whether Katniss is going to the Hunger Games or not. She's already going. So the debate becomes, can she win? So we see her preparing, essentially. She says goodbye to her family and Gale, who gives her advice on how to win. And then she rides the train to the Capitol, where she starts to get some advice from her new mentor, Haymitch. And then we reach the Capitol at the break into two. The train arrives in this upside-down world that is very different from District 12. Peeta waves at the crowd, reminding Katniss that he's already playing the game, and she's very distrustful of him. The B story, though, is Peeta. He declares his love for Katniss on TV, and this is the moment he becomes the love interest. And he helps Katniss earn support that she needs to win the games. He will also help her learn her theme, that to truly win the games, she has to do more than just survive them. Now, the fun and games, we see Katniss receiving a makeover, training for the games, the Hunger Games actually begin, and she struggles with dehydration and burn wounds. She discovers Peeta has allied with the career tributes, confirming her suspicion that he can't be trusted. So this is feeling like a downward path for Katniss. And it is. At the midpoint, we have a false defeat. Katniss is chased up a tree by the careers where she is surely going to meet her end. But then the stakes are raised, and there's a twist. Peeta saves her life, proving that his love for her might not be an act. Interesting. In the Bad Guys Close In, we see an upward path Bad Guys Close In. Despite the fact that she's still in the Hunger Games, she forms an alliance with Rue. They blow up the supplies of the careers, and things feel like they're getting better for Katniss. But then we reach an All Is Lost, where Rue is caught in a trap and killed. There's our whiff of death. And in the Dark Night of the Soul, Rue's death fuels Katniss's anger toward the Capitol, and she realizes she can do something to defy them. In her Dark Night Epiphany, she makes her first rebellious act when she buries Rue in flowers to shame the Capitol. It's her first step toward that theme. At the break into 3, though, the game makers announce a rule change. Now 2 tributes can win if they're from the same district. Katniss calls out Peeta's name, and you sort of notice the mirror to the act break into 2. The boy that she vowed not to trust is now her best chance at winning. So in the finale, now she's got to put her plan into action. She has to find Peeta. He's been badly injured, nurse him back to health. They survive until they're the only 2 left. Then the Capitol announces another rule change. Only one of them can win. Katniss proves she really has learned the theme by threatening to eat the poisonous berries, which would leave the Capitol with no winner, giving up her survival in order to prove that they don't own her. The game makers declare both tributes can win, and in the final image, we see Katniss riding the train home to District 12 with Peeta. She's not just a victor, she's a rebel. All right, that is the beat sheet. I did it in like 50 minutes today. This is a record. If you'd like more examples, I did promise you that Save the Cat starter kit. It comes with a full PDF cheat sheet of the 15 beats, 3 full in-depth beat sheet breakdowns of popular novels, and a blank beat sheet template where you can start crafting your own bestseller. And you can find that at jessicabrody.com/STC-starter. So if someone can drop that into the chat, that would be fantastic. So you can get that. It's free, and you can start building your beat sheet right away and get that cheat sheet for the beats and some more examples. Now, if you'd like to go even deeper and really master this method, I do a live masterclass. I only do them about once or twice a year, and I've actually taken a 2-year break, and now it's back. So it's coming up in May. I do 3 live classes. It's a webinar series where it's running this year on May 13th, May 20th, May 27th. Those are all Saturdays. And basically, we go deep into the method. This is probably the deepest I ever go into the method, where we go through all the 15 beats. We do all the ingredients of a story-worthy hero. I break down the finale into this thing called the 5-point finale, which goes even deeper into the finale. And I have tons of examples from not just books, but also movies. So this is 3 live classes, and every class we focus on a different act. And we also do a Q&A. It's about half content and half Q&A. So I spend, each session's I think 3 hours long. So I spend an hour and a half each week just answering questions, which is my favorite part, actually. But yeah, so if you want to really dive into the method, there is some early bird pricing running until April 21st. It's, I think, $25 off. And you can register for that at savethecat.com. I believe that will be in the description of the YouTube video. And also, I think someone's going to put it in the chat. So I really hope to see you at my masterclass coming up soon if you'd like to master the method with me and write your novel with me. So thank you. I'm very pleased to answer questions now.
Great, thank you so much, Jessica. That's fantastic. Went through quite a lot of content in 50 minutes. But yeah,
it's exhausting, but it's fun.
Yeah, like I was wondering, it's like, oh yeah, you definitely need to take a sip of water every now and again. But yes, anyone, if you have any questions, do put them in the text chat here, and I'll bring them up. I think I picked up a few people asked here. We've got one from Vidana, who says, when you're doing a trilogy, do you make each book an act?
Very good. Who said that? Who asked that?
Vandana.
Bandana, very good. Yes, absolutely. What's really cool about the beat sheet is it can be used more for more than just novels. It can be used to track an entire series. So you could essentially say that the series is one long story, which means you're going to have three different parts, which very nicely break up into three acts. So it's a great way to track a series. You can track a two-book series, a three-book series, a four-book series. It's all about where you break up the beat sheet among the series.
Cool. We have sort of more of a comment here. Ludwig van El says, "What I find hard with Save the Cat is maintaining the exact percentages when doing rewrites." Um, are you saying that people should be adhering quite closely to the percentages?
So the percentages, as I mentioned at the beginning, they are there as guidelines. And what I tell people is use them when you're having issues. I mean, you can use them the whole time. I definitely adhere to them. But if you are finding that your act two is feeling really slow, your midpoint might be too late and you're just spending way too long in the fun and games. Or if you're finding that nothing's happening in your first act, maybe your setup's too long. So it's a great way to diagnose your book and where some of those problem areas might lie. Some people get very excited about the guidelines. They're like, oh, good, I have something to write to. I know I have to write to 10%, and then I can do my catalyst, and then I have to write to 20%, do my break into two. Some people get really freaked out about the guidelines. They're like, it's too constraining. So I tell people, use them when you need them. And when you're getting feedback from your first draft or your second, third, fourth draft, and people are giving you certain kinds of feedback, you might go back to those guidelines and see, am I missing some of those marks?
We've got a question here from Nicole. How do you handle the beats when you have multiple POVs, like multiple main characters?
Yeah, great question. So this is a question I get asked a lot, and I actually end up going much deeper into it in the next Save the Cat book, Save the Cat Writes a Young Adult Novel, because I've been asked so much. But I'll give you the short answer here, which is essentially that every character who you consider to be a hero, meaning they have adequate page time, they have a full character arc, that person needs their own beat sheet, because the beat sheet is there to help guide you through a character arc and make sure that the character arc is feeling compelling, is feeling realistic. So when you throw a character in and you don't give them adequate time or adequate beats, they're going to start to feel thin. They're going to start to feel like they're not working, or the reader might not care about them as much. And so I tell people, for every POV, it's usually a POV equals a character, not always, or equals a hero, not always, but most of the time. For every POV, you're going to want to give them a beat sheet. Now, that doesn't mean that you're going to have 45 different beats if you have three heroes. Characters can share beats. They can have maybe the same catalyst sends them off into different directions. Maybe they join together at the fun and games and go on a fun and games journey together, and they're sharing that beat. So heroes can share beats. They can have separate beats. It's really how you set it up. But I like to track. I think that tracking a full beat sheet for each hero will just help make sure that each hero feels equally story worthy in your story.
We've got a few people asking this question in a few different permutations. But does my hero have to be in the first chapter? Some people were talking about starting with the side character and then the protagonist turning up a little bit later.
Yeah, great question. So I do get this question often. It's usually phrased as more, what if I have a prologue that doesn't have my character in it? It's kind of the same thing. So no, not necessarily. I mean, you don't have to do anything. And that's one thing I always like to say is I have this set of quote rules, but they're guidelines, and stories are creative for a reason. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to follow any beats. You can do whatever you want. So take everything I say with a grain of salt. But in terms of following the Save the Cat beat sheet, if it is something that you're interested in following, the way I like to look at it is the first chapter or scene that your hero appears in is their opening image, because the opening image is designed to introduce us to your hero in an engaging way. So if your hero doesn't appear until the second scene or the third scene or chapters, if you're using chapters, then that's your opening image, which means the stuff that comes before is just maybe a prologue, maybe a side story, maybe a precursor, maybe a flash forward to something. Maybe you're using it to engage the reader or tell them more about the world, and that's all cool too. But if you are looking to kind of follow the beat sheet, then just consider the first scene your hero is in as the opening image.
We've got a question here from Keith. I guess you will sort of dispute the premise. You've described upbeat endings. How would one deal with a sad ending to a story?
Yeah, it's a great question. So there's a couple different ways to answer this question. So there's what's called reverse arcs, which is where the hero actually gets worse over the course of the story, or they go further away from their theme instead of learning it. And those are usually like villain and or antagonist stories or villain origin stories. And so that might not be what you define as a sad ending. Perhaps that's just a reverse arc, and there's you can do that. In terms of a sad ending, like maybe your hero dies at the end, maybe somebody else dies at the end, it doesn't actually matter where you end it. What matters is that we went somewhere, that somebody changed. Because when you have a story where nobody changes, the reader will feel cheated out of an experience. They'll just kind of say, why did I go on this journey when everybody's the same as they were at the beginning? So the thing that's most important to remember is not whether the ending is happy or sad, is what are you saying about this person that is changing? What is the thing that they had to overcome or had to learn? And how is that say something about what it means to be human? So I would focus more on how does your hero change rather than is it ending in an upbeat or a sad way?
So we've got a question here that I guess there was a lot of discussion in the comments, and I'm sure you get it all the time. The idea of does using a method like this sort of force you into becoming formulaic or cookie cutter?
I do get that question all the time. And I call formulaic the F word for that very reason. Because a lot of people are very afraid of the F word. They're very afraid that it's going to make their story feel formulaic. And usually my response is, well, then you would have to call Agatha Christie formulaic. You'd have to call Stephen King formulaic. You'd have to call Jane Austen formulaic. You'd have to call all of these greats formulaic because I've found the beats at roughly the same spots in all of those stories. So does that mean that it's formulaic? Maybe it means that it's just the way story works. And so you could look at that as a formula, or you could look at that as the blueprint of what makes a story. And the way I like to think about it for myself is I like to think it's like building a house. You know, there's certain things you need to make the house stand up. You need walls, you need floors, you need windows, you need a roof. Otherwise, it's not going to stand. It's going to topple over. So you can build 1,000 different types of houses that look and feel very different. And you could look at that and go, well, it's still a house. It's a formula. Yes, it is, but you kind of needed that formula in order to build the house. So what I like to think of the save the cat method, and it's really, you know, whether you're following the save the cat method, the hero's journey, that we're all breaking down the same kind of structure, just we're looking at it through a slightly different lens, is this is what a story is made of. This is what human beings are hardwired to respond to in stories. So you could think of it as a formula, or if that word makes you nervous, you could just think of it as a guide to make sure that you are hitting moments that are working in making the story come together.
Got a great question here. Rami says,
Ooh.
looking back at your early rejected manuscripts, which of the beats were the most critical or eye-opening for you?
Oh, wow. I've never been asked that. That is a great question. The catalyst for sure. I don't think I even had one, or if I did, it was like at 30%. And then that, so that wasn't working. The break into 2 was a huge one. I sort of had my hero already doing something, like they just were sort of doing the same thing throughout the whole story. There was no like transition into a break into 2. That I completely underutilized the B story character. I mean, I didn't know the method. I didn't know the names of things. So I had a B story character, but they weren't really serving any sort of true thematic purpose. And so they were feeling not very impactful. And then the finale was just a mess. I mean, it wasn't even a finale. I think I just wrapped everything up and was like, oh, and then it's over. So in terms of really the structure, I would say the Act 2 part, like this idea of this upside down world, this idea of this false victory, false defeat, changing the direction of the plot, my plot just never really changed direction much. It just felt like a series of events that kept happening, and there was really no kind of thread tying them together. It was a big mess, I will say.
We've got a question here from Jessica, which is a bit more sort of broad. How can you decide what your hero's purpose is in the story? I suppose a lot of authors come in with a great story idea, but they get to sort of crystallize what the hero's own personal journey is.
That's a great question. I like to think about the hero and the story being sort of this perfect pair, and the plot that you've chosen should be a plot that is designed to transform the hero. And the hero that you've chosen should be a hero that is destined to be transformed by this plot. So if you think of plot as all the external things that are happening to your hero, and then you think of character transformation as all the things that are happening on the inside of your hero, how do those things dovetail together? How are the external things triggering internal realizations and internal change in your hero? And if you start with a plot, you can look at the elements of your plot, and you can look at the conflict that you've created, or you can look at the ideas you have for scenes, and then start to ask yourself, who would that transform? Who would be most challenged by that? Like if you have a scene where a character's being, like locked in a closet, like who would be the most scared in that closet? Maybe someone who has a tragic backstory of being, falling down a well and being trapped in a well for 24 hours. I don't know, I'm just making stuff up. But you look at what you want to do in the story, and then you ask yourself, who would this impact the most? And that will start to help you shape your hero. Another thing you can start to think about is, what are your hero's problems? Like, why is their life imperfect? What do they want to change about their life? And then start digging deeper into those problems. Why are they flawed that way? What happened to them in the past to make them flawed? We call that, in Save the Cat terms, we call it the shard of glass. It's sort of the initial wound or upbringing or something that happened in their past that made them who they are today. So I like to start there with, like, what kind of problems does my character have? Why are those problems there? And then how is this plot specifically going to help them overcome them?
I'll give you a second here. We've got a question. I think a few people have brought this one up as well. Can this fit into a non-linear structure? I guess when you have books where everything isn't chronological.
Yeah, that's a great question. I have yet to break down a nonlinear one, but when I on paper, but when I read them, what I find is that there's usually multiple beat sheets going on. There's usually, like, if let's say there's two timelines, there'll usually be two beat sheets, one for the present timeline, one for the past timeline. That doesn't necessarily mean that all the beats might happen in all of the timelines. So for instance, maybe you have a past timeline that runs right up to the All Is Lost. And the All Is Lost is actually the backstory for the present timeline. And now you have the present timeline starting at, after the All Is Lost, like basically in the Dark Night of the Soul. But because now it's a present storyline, it also has to have all the beats. So you're sort of transitioning that Dark Night of the Soul into the setup. And now we have a whole nother journey that goes all the way through. So there's different ways you can slice and dice it. If essentially it's about how those stories come together and what each of those storylines is doing in the entire transformation of the character. So it's a little bit like writing a series in that you are probably tracking a much bigger story than just a single timeline. So you want to ask yourself, what events are triggering what realizations at what time. And then if you want to use the Save the Cat method to track it, I would actually track two different beat sheets and look at it as like a prequel and like the main story.
This is another one that people have been asking in various forms, but Steve says, will Save the Cat also work for short stories and novellas?
I say yes. I've written tons of short stories using the Save the Cat method. So I was asked for many of my trilogies, I was asked to write short stories within the world of the trilogy. So maybe another character or a prequel. And I absolutely got out my beat sheet and started doing it. But what I find with short stories and I've also written novellas within my universes as well. What I found with those is that the scope tends to be smaller. So the catalyst is probably smaller. The break into two is not like the big life-changing decision. It might just be a decision that changes the course of a day or a week or this one event. Because you're kind of, with short stories, and not always, but most of the time with short stories and novellas, you're zooming in a little bit more into a character's life. And so you're sort of looking at a slice of life or a piece of that character's life. But absolutely you can use the beats to track that. Now, there might not be like a B story character. Maybe it's too short to actually have other characters. Maybe it's just one character. And so you're going to track the transformation arc without the help of that external character who represents it. Or maybe you're going to, maybe you're obviously your beats are going to be a lot shorter. But I definitely think that you can use it if it's helpful. And again, that's all, again, my grain of salt is like, if it's helpful, don't try to I wouldn't advise trying to like force your story into a method just to say that I use this method. If you have another method that works, or if you write more organically without one, that's fine too. Just if it's helpful, then I think that the Save the Cat method is useful for that.
Cool. At which point, I think I'm going to call an end to it. There's a lot of great questions. I want to thank you all for sending those in. Yeah, Jessica, thank you so much for joining us. It's been fantastic. Before we sign
Thank
off, is there
you.
anything else you want to share with the folks? Any reminder of what you've got coming up?
Well, no, just if you'd like to join the masterclass, get lots more examples, lots more in depth, and I take lots more time to answer questions because I know there always is a lot of them. And like I said, it's my favorite part. So hopefully you'll show up at the masterclass and we can dive deeper into these beats. And yeah, thank you so much for tuning in today. And thank you, Reedsy, for having me. I'm super, super honored to be here and representing the Save the Cat.
Oh, well, it's been an absolute pleasure. Hope we can have you again at some point. For those of you at home, we'll send out a follow-up email to anyone who's registered on Eventbrite, so you'll get a link to the replay and the transcript in just a few days. In 2 weeks' time, we have another webinar on writing your first draft with author S.J. Watson, previous guest and the author of Before I Go to Sleep. It should be a good one. So thank you all for tuning in. Thank you, Jessica, and we'll see you all again soon. Goodbye, everyone.